Welcome, candidates, to the Equity Investment Analysis lesson. In our today's session, we will introduce a new topic known as equity market equilibrium. In this topic, I will define equity market. We also seek to understand the meaning of equity market equilibrium. In the same topic, we are going to study the justification for short-term and long-term equilibrium. We will also have a time to consider various models like the Greenwald-Kroner model, the Yardeni model, Tobin-Skew model. Then we will study the short-term valuation methods, and finally the stock market diversity and its measure. Welcome to our today's session. We begin with the definition of the term equity market. Equity market. Equity market, candidates, is a market in which firms issue stocks in order to fund their operations. And after issuance, investors trade shares on exchanges and over-the-counter markets. So, learners, equity markets are an important part of a country's economy. Their primary function is to support the growth of business, the growth of industry, by channeling funds from savers to farms. From savers to farms. From savers to farms or institutions. All right? So, in between here, there is what we are calling equity market. The function, I've said, is to support the growth of businesses, the growth of industries, and so on. So, candidates, the equity markets not only provide firms with an opportunity to access capital and raise funds to grow business, but also they give investors a chance to become shareholders. The equity markets also serve the role of a common platform for the buyers and sellers of listed public stocks. They can also include private stocks that are traded through the over-the-counter market. And learners, the equity market, I can also say, is a mechanism that exists for the issue of investing in and the trading of marketable equity instruments that represent the permanent or the semi-permanent capital of the issuers or of the companies. So, candidates, in our today's lesson, I will expand on what I've just talked about. I've defined an equity market. It is a market where equity instruments are traded. And in my introduction, I've mentioned several terms like the equities. I've mentioned term market mechanism, market mechanisms. I talked about issue. I mentioned another term which is trading. Then lastly, I made mention of the term permanent stroke semi-permanent capital. permanent and semi-permanent capital. So candidates, what do we mean by equities? Equities, candidates, are also known as shares in our context. And they are issued by companies in terms of the statutes that regulates them, usually the Companies Act. And there are two types of equities. One is the ordinary shares, which is also known as the common shares or common stocks. And they represent the permanent capital of companies. They have no maturity debt. Why? Because they are much like perpetual bonds. Then there are also another category of equities, which is referred to as, let me use my black pen, referred to as preference. This is ordinary shares and preference shares. They are also called the preferred shares or the preferred stocks. They may be redeemable, which means they have a fixed maturity date, and they may be redeemable at the option of the issuer, or they may be non-redeemable, meaning they have no maturity date. And the non-redeemable preference shares are sometimes called perpetual preference shares. And candidates' shares pay what we call dividends, as opposed to bonds and the money market instruments that pay interest. And candidates, the dividends on preference shares are usually fixed rate dividends, and they have preference over dividends on ordinary shares. So that's all I can say about equities. I've said there are two categories, the ordinary shares and the preference shares. Under the preference shares, candidates, we have the redeemable preference shares and the non-redeemable preference shares. Then another term I mentioned in the definition is market mechanism. Market mechanism. Candidates, the market mechanism is the structure, is the systems, refers to the structure, refers to the systems and conventions that exist to facilitate the issue and trading of shares. And there are two types of market, the over-the-counter market and the exchange-driven. Exchange-driven means the exchange that is regulated. So there are two categories of the market. We're saying we have the over-the-counter market, over-the-counter market, over-the-counter market, and we have regulated market, regulated market, regulated market. So market mechanism, I repeat, is the structure, the systems, the convention that exists to facilitate the issue and the trading of shares. There are two types, the over-the-counter market and the exchange-driven market. And most shares candidates, most share markets around the world are exchange-driven markets. They are exchange-driven markets or regulated markets. Then there is a issue. Issue is another term. Issue. And in issue, candidates, we're referring to the primary market. Primary market. The original shares of companies are unlisted shares and are issued to the founders of the companies. Important to note that the original shares of companies are unlisted shares and are issued to the founders of companies. So candidates, the directors of companies only list the shares and issue new shares when they have established a good profit record and are able to comply with the listing requirements of the exchange. Therefore, the main motivation for listing shares on an exchange is to have the mechanism to acquire further capital easily and at a good price. That's primary market. All right? Primary what? Market. Primary market. When we are talking of issue, we are referring to the primary market because I've said that the original shares of a company are basically unlisted. That means they are not traded on the stock exchange, but they are issued to the founders of the company. And that's what we are referring to as the primary market. Then the directors of a company, candidates, after the company is formed, they can only list the shares or they can issue new shares when they have established a good profit record and are able to do what? To comply with the requirements of the exchange. How about trading? When I say trading, I'm referring to the secondary market. Secondary market. Secondary market. Candidates trading in shares, that is the secondary market. Broking and dealing is a sizable business in most financial markets. The majority of secondary share markets are exchange driven, and the secondary equity market participants would constitute, number one, the members of the share exchanges. The members of the share exchanges. These members are also called users. All right? They are called what? They are called users in some markets. And they could be banks, they could be small companies that are owned by participants, it could be individuals who have unlimited liability and so on. Another participant is the issuers of equity. Issuers of equity. Issuers of equity basically are companies. Learners, these are just companies. And companies not only supply equity to the market, but they are in many countries permitted to purchase their own shares and hold them as treasury stock. Or they can even cancel them. Another participant is the investors. The investors include all the ultimate lenders and certain financial intermediaries and so on. And these financial intermediaries, candidates are the major participants. Okay? They could be retirement funds, they could be insurers, they could be the exchange traded funds, they could be securities unit trusts, and in some countries the foreign sector plays a major role as an investor. Another participant here is the speculators. We also have arbitrageurs. These may be members of exchanges or non-members, and most of them trade intraday in order to avoid settlement outlays. Their usefulness lies in increasing the turnover in the equity market, thereby contributing to efficient price discovery. Price discovery. So those are some of the participants in the secondary market. Then another time I mentioned in my definition is permanent and semi-permanent capital. This is the permanent or semi-permanent capital, the permanent or the semi-permanent capital of the issuers or the companies. And candidates, common shares and perpetual shares represent the permanent capital of a company. The preference shares, which are redeemable, and other forms of borrowing, for example, bank overdraft facilities utilized in the case of smaller companies, and the issue of bonds and commercial paper in case of the larger companies, represent the semi-permanent, represent the semi-permanent capital of a company. And it should be noted that the permanent capital is the capital required to maintain the ongoing business of the company, so that the company can invest in plants, can invest in equipment, and to hold the permanent core of investors, or the permanent core of, say, the inventories, the permanent part of the inventories. So the holders of common shares are rewarded by sharing in the profits of the company. The redeemable preference shares, on the other hand, are issued when temporary but medium-term funding is required. All right? And this medium-term funding is required in preference to bank loans. And there are main two types of considerations and inconveniences in this regard. One is the uncertainty of obtaining funds at each rollover at maturity. Number two is the uncertainty of the rate of interest to be paid at each rollover date. Therefore, candidates, the uncertainty of the rate of interest to be paid, or let me say the ability to, therefore the ability to do what? The ability to issue preference shares removes such uncertainties. So the issuer has a fixed or known rate that is paid at known intervals, and the funds are available for the full period that the funds are required. Therefore, the payments in some cases can be delayed. In that case, we will have what we call the cumulative preference shares. Cumulative preference shares. So I've said that the permanent capital represents the equity, that is the ordinary equities, and the semi-permanent capital would represent the redeemable preference shares, the bank overdrafts, and such like sources of capital. And with that, candidates, we bring this lesson to a close. In this lesson, we introduced the topic equity market equilibrium. I defined equity market. I defined the terms within that definition, that is the equities, the market mechanism, issue or primary markets. I have discussed the secondary markets, the permanent and semi-permanent capital. In our next lesson, we will seek to understand the meaning of equity market equilibrium. Thank you for attending our today's session. Bye-bye.